Hi everyone, I'm Tara Lon. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. Today's episode is brought to you by my new online accessory shop for women, Beyond Measure. You are loved beyond measure by our creator, so my shop strives to bring that hope-filled message through inspirational and faith-based products. Every item is handmade and customized for you. To shop for yourself, or for mom for Mother's Day, go to beyondmeasure.shop. Again, that's beyondmeasure.shop. It'll also be in the show notes. I'm here today with Dr. Deborah Gilboa, also known as Dr. G. Dr. G is a youth development and resilience expert, plus a family physician. She's also a leading media personality who's been seen on Today, Good Morning America, The Doctors, plus more. Today, we're going to address normal teen behavior versus signs of a bigger issue. Hi, Dr. G. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. So for those who have not heard you before on my program, why don't you just give a little bit more insight into who you are?
Sure. Like you said, I'm a family doctor. So I've been a physician for 23 years now. And I'm a mom of 4 boys. And although now I guess I have to say 2 men and 2 boys because they're 20, 18, 16, and 14.
Wow.
And I am a resilience expert, which means that in addition to practicing clinically, I've spent a lot of the last decade researching, writing about, speaking about, understanding better how we navigate change, how we handle stress, and what works to make us stronger, as well as what are the risks.
I see your book in the background, From Stress to Resilient. Is that your new book?
That is my most recent book, yes.
We'll talk about it. So great, wonderful. So you are the perfect person to talk about this subject. So we're going to talk about normal teen behavior versus signs that there may be a bigger issue brewing and parents may need to seek help. Before we get into the details of that, why don't we just start by addressing some mental illness? And I talk about that a lot on the show, mental illness. So we've heard some of these before, but why don't we just start by you just addressing for teens, like what are the most common types of mental illness, just so we can lay it all out and parents have an understanding of what that might look like.
So when we say mental illness in our society, what we mean usually is a chronic episodic issue that's going to come into play at different points of this person's life, their whole life, right? From now when we figure it out until the end of their life. And it's really important to know what that can be. That can be depression, that can be anxiety, and those are the 2 most common in kids and adults. But also bipolar disorder is a big issue for some kids. Eating disorders, disordered eating can fall under this category. Some people say, well, is ADHD or ADD a mental illness? It's certainly cognitive for sure. Some people put it in the category and some people don't. There's OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. There's ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. There are a lot of different names. I was hoping, though, Caroline, if it's okay, to point out that although only 18% of teens and adults suffer from chronic episodic mental illness their whole lives, 100% of us suffer from mental distress just about every year over something.
Okay.
And those symptoms can look really similar. And we don't have good language for this, right? If I said to you, hey, last year, gosh, in March, I was sick for like 10 days. I was in bed. I couldn't go to work. I needed help taking care of my kids. I couldn't meet any of my usual obligations. And then I got better. You can picture that. You understand what acute physical illness can be. You might think to yourself, oh, maybe she had pneumonia or a stomach infection or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
We understand that there's acute physical illness that can be really debilitating, maybe even fatal, but that also it's possible to recover completely. We don't think that about mental illness, and we're wrong, right? We think if somebody says they're having symptoms of mental illness, that's it. This person's life is going to be different forever. They're never totally going to get over it. It's never going to be okay again. And that's not the case. Most people every year, because of the death of a loved one or a major change that they're dealing with in their family or a major transition, deal with severe mental distress that can be really debilitating, unable to get out of bed, or really hard to meet your regular obligations, or really needing a lot of extra support or professional help, or even potentially fatal, from which you can totally recover.
Now, is it safe to
And
say that mental distress is triggered by something, whereas mental illness, maybe that's something that is passed down or it's caused by another facet?
that, and it's one that in the medical field, we're working really hard to answer. The answer's gonna probably end up being yes to a degree. Although I'll also tell you that the proclivity for mental distress is probably also partially genetic and environmental as well as situational, which is what you're asking me about, right? You're saying, isn't it that mental distress is caused by the situation you're in, and mental illness has all these other factors? Mental illness definitely has all those other factors, but mental distress does to an extent as well. So it's not as I guess what I want to say is a lot of things that make it really hard for parents of teens to even consider the possibility that their kid has a diagnosis of some kind is this question: what does that mean for the rest of our lives? Not what does that mean for this month or even this year, but what does that mean for forever? And when you've got the weight of forever, you often don't want to know. You often put off trying to get a diagnosis or asking for professional help. But the majority of the time, it isn't forever. It's now, and it needs your attention, and it could be really dangerous. Just like I can't ignore my child's fever, even if I know it's from strep throat, and strep throat you can heal from entirely. I still have to address it. I still have to work on getting them the support they need, even though it's not a forever diagnosis like multiple sclerosis or something else, right? So in the same way, even though it isn't forever, it doesn't mean you don't need help with it.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that it's probably not forever, I think could really help people get care.
Well, that's good. I'm so glad you brought that up because parents are confused about it. So maybe we can talk about the difference between the temporary, the stress, the mental distress, or what is the term that you use for it?
Mental distress.
Yeah, the difference between that and mental illness. So can you just give some examples? Let's use anxiety because someone can have mental distress and anxious about maybe giving a speech or some big project coming up and maybe they're feeling a certain way, but it's only for a season. How would a parent distinguish between the two? Like whether
Here's the good news. You don't have to.
Okay.
That's above your pay grade. You don't have to worry about that. So because it takes a long time, eventually you'll figure it out. And it may be that once somebody says to you, hang on, your kiddo, like maybe an educator says, oh, well, the reason you're seeing that grade is because every time your child tried to get up to do that speech in class, they were overcome and they could not even do it. So I couldn't really grade it because they couldn't ever do it. And you're like, oh, well, okay, that's a particular problem with public speaking. But then as you think about it, you think, hang on, we've had that problem with first day of school every year. We've had that problem with new friends every year. We've had that, right? And you say like, oh, okay, this is a kid who experiences their feelings of anxiousness hit them pretty hard. And you pointed out something else that's really important. And that is feeling anxious is not the same thing as having generalized anxiety disorder. Feeling anxious can keep you alive. I hope that when my child goes to get into a car to get a ride home from an event and their friend who's supposed to drive them is staggering around and talking about how much they drank, that makes them feel really anxious enough to not get in that car. So feeling anxious is actually a protective feeling. Anxiety disorder is when feeling anxious doesn't match your circumstances and interferes with your ability to get through your regular activities of life, right? And when that repeats, not just for that season, right? That's not just happening for the first week at a new school. It's happening episodically over years. It's not only, by the way, mental illness that it can take the medical field years to label with a diagnosis like that. There are certain kinds of lung diseases that we say, well, if you get this once a year or twice a year, we don't say anything about it being chronic. But if you get this a couple of times a year for 3 years, then we say, oh, it's a chronic issue. Chronic can take a while to be able to tell, which is why I often say to parents about physical and mental illness, don't worry about it. Let's deal with what is instead of what if.
So what if a parent has a concern? Like what should that concern look like as far as anxiety? Is it if, oh, I need you to go set the table and the child's anxious? Like, what does that look like? I mean, I know that was kind of a
right. Okay. So you say to your kiddo, hey, my boss is coming over for dinner with their family. I need you to set the table. And the kiddo's not doing it, right? Let's say this is a 10-year-old who's like, they're okay. And then they don't do it. And you're like, hey, I think you just got involved in your game or whatever, but I need you to do this. And they're like, I can't. And they have a big meltdown. It's too much pressure. I know everything has to be perfect tonight because you're looking for that promotion. And I know we're supposed to be doing everything for your boss and their family, but I can't take it. Right. If that isn't every day, then, and I say a lot, we want to deal with what is, not what if. So this is not the moment to figure out if my child has an anxiety disorder. This is a moment to say, okay, I hear your feelings. Also, I think you're maybe reflecting back to me some of my feelings, right? Maybe you picked up on some of my healthy, normal anxiety about having my boss and their family over for dinner. And let's understand if there's a way that we can get to our goal, which is having this dinner happen and having the table set right now. Right now, I hear that you're feeling anxious about that. I'm also feeling anxious about this event tonight. I understand why you are. Table needs to get set. Do you want to set it, or is there something else you could do to help in the kitchen while I go set the table that feels lower stakes to you, but would still be helpful, right? That's dealing with what is. We are not, before my boss rings the doorbell, going to answer the question of whether or not my child has an anxiety disorder. This is not that moment, right? So dealing with what is and not what if. As parents, we're kind of always running on two tracks. We're running on the right now. Where's the kid? What do they need to be doing? What do I need to be doing? Do they have their backpack? What time is bedtime? All that stuff. And hopefully we get moments of having that 10,000-foot view of overall, how's my kid doing? And so we're just collecting that experience as one data point. This one data point. Now, if this is one data point of 100, where every time there's something I ask my child to do, or every time there's anything new at all, my child totally melts down, then that's part of that 10,000-foot view where we say, hey, this isn't just about the strategies to get through dinner. It's also maybe there's something in an underlying way. An example that I think is really useful is now I live in a boy house, so there are basketballs and footballs and baseballs and whatever all over my house. And if every time somebody goes to straighten the living room, all those balls have rolled to one corner, right? Every time you notice you pick them up and you put them away. But at some point, your brain says, I wonder if our floor isn't level, right? Every time you just pick them up, or you have your kid pick them up, put them in the box that they go in. But at some point you go, you know what? This actually happens every darn time. I wonder if it's a problem with the floor. Like, is the house not level, or is the apartment not level? And so you're looking at two levels. What has to get done right now? And then every once in a while, you kind of pull the lens back, look at the bigger picture, and say, am I supposed to be noticing something more fundamental here, more foundational here? And I always encourage parents, when you are feeling anxious or angry or upset or tired, it's not the time to go up to 10,000 feet. That's not your moment. Now it's the what is moment. If you can find a time to talk to your co-parent, if you have one, to talk to your child's teacher or coach or some other adult who you trust to care about your child, not to see the world as you see them, not to raise them like you would raise them. You just trust that they care about your child and that they have some kind of adult wisdom to say, here's something I've noticed a few times. What do you notice?
And what if you notice the same types of things? It's a pattern. Now what?
Yeah. So when we see patterns, we get to the now what. And the now what is usually, unless it's something that you happen to be very comfortable and knowledgeable about, doesn't cause you any stress at all, the now what is usually, let's ask a professional about that. Caroline, do you have a car? Do you drive sometimes?
Yes, all the time.
Me too. For me, I thought maybe because of where you're from. And for me, I drive and I'm a good driver, but I know nothing about car mechanics. And if my car makes a noise a couple of times, I'll probably do, I think, the most normal thing and ignore it. But if it keeps making that noise and somebody else is in my car and I say, do you hear that noise? And they're like, I do hear that noise. That does not sound normal. I will take it to someone who understands cars better than I do. They may not understand my car better than I do. I know a few little quirky things about my car. I know my car best, but they know cars in general, and they'll be able to give me a sense of what my options are and what might help. Doesn't mean I have to do it, but There's so many things that we are not experts in. And as parents, we often feel like, well, if it's about my kid, I'm supposed to be an expert. Nope. If it's about your kid, you're supposed to know how to curate experts, not be every expert.
Yeah, no, that's very well stated. So let's talk about depression, because depression, moodiness, I'm assuming with teens, that can happen. Let's talk about some normal types of behavior as far as that's concerned, and maybe not so normal where a deeper dive needs to be looked into this.
It's really hard. And actually, nobody can just look at somebody who says they're feeling sad and know if that sadness is sadness or depression. Not psychiatrists. I mean, really, nobody can. It takes patterns of behavior. It takes asking a lot of good questions. So if your child is sad, first of all, does it seem reasonable to you that given their experiences and their point of view, that they would feel sad? Maybe their good friend is moving away or just not wanting to hang out with them anymore. Maybe they didn't make a team that they were hoping to make. Maybe they ended up in a different homeroom than the people they were hoping to be with, right? Like those are some pretty reasonable things to be sad or frustrated or angry about. Here's the hard part. Pretty much, and this is going to be true of every mental illness you could think of. This is really a good overarching way to look at things. Pretty much every behavior that isn't harmful is sometimes normal and sometimes not. Feeling sad, feeling anxious, being angry, yelling, avoiding, slamming a door, refusing, denying, lying. All of those can be developmentally normal for teenagers. That doesn't make them acceptable. I think a lot about, and I say this to parents a lot, just because something is developmentally normal, like a teenager who gets snarky or mouthy with you or lies about something, and you say, well, I think a lot of people this age do that. Okay, that might be true. But when your 2-year-old bit or kicked, that was developmentally normal for your 2-year-old, but you didn't say, oh, let's send a picture to grandma. You said, we don't bite, right? And in the exact same way, these may be developmentally normal, but if they're unacceptable behaviors, we should name them as unacceptable behaviors. Yes, it is normal to try lying, and it is useful to get in trouble for it because lying isn't okay. It is normal to try breaking the rules, and it's not okay. So you don't have to be worried that your 2-year-old is a psychopath because they bit somebody. And you also don't praise them for biting someone or just let them get away with it. And in the same way, you don't have to be worried that your kid is a sociopath for not wanting to come to the table for dinner. But if it's not acceptable in your house, then it's not acceptable. And you can still have boundaries. When you see that a child is doing something that is a change, when they surprise you in a good way or a bad way, I want you to just tie it to your curiosity, not to a diagnosis and not to an accusation. So when your child, and I say surprise because sometimes what we see feels like a good behavior. For example, your child is normally out with friends or out at sports or out at their job or out studying for school or in their room on their phone or talking to their friends. And then suddenly they're just acting a little differently and they keep coming to sit next to you on the couch. And it feels great. And you wished they would do this and you've missed them doing this. But you also think, I wonder what's wrong. Well, and when that happens, even though it feels great, we usually check them for a fever, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's so lovely that they
Right.
want to sit and be quiet. I had a preschool teacher call me about one of my kids and be like, hey, I think your kiddo is sick. He was 3. And I was like, why, what's wrong? And she said, well, he doesn't have a fever, but he's been a very good listener today. Sure enough, 2 hours later, he had a fever of like 103. She was right. He was sick, right? Do I wish that he just all of a sudden decided in his 3-year-old self to be a good listener? Of course I do. But that is not the child he was. So when a behavior surprises us, and a lot of times that surprise feels like frustration, right? Because they're doing something bad we weren't expecting, something undesirable, something against the rules, something disrespectful, something ugly. So a lot of times we're feeling frustrated. But even if we're feeling a good surprise, we as parents just need to remember to tie that to our curiosity. Not a diagnosis, oh, you must be depressed or bipolar or whatever. Not an accusation, what's wrong with you? Our curiosity. And that curiosity can look this simple to teenagers. Hey, I noticed that this thing is different. Is there something going on?
Yeah, no, that's good. Now, let's say they've been curious, the parents been curious for, let's say, weeks, months. So now they've raised their curiosity to concern. What does that, let's use depression, and then maybe we can use bipolar. What does normal, I guess, moodiness for a teen look like versus a concern? And I know that's probably hard, and every case is different.
Right. Here is why I'm not answering your question. And I understand that that might be frustrating. And that's because in one of my kids, it looks different than in a different one of my kids. Same bio parents, same household, still different because personality plays such a big mix. And it could look different at 13 and a half than it does at 14, than it does at 14 and a half, because they're changing so fast. So I cannot, frustrating as it is, and one of my closest friends is one of the leading child and adolescent psychiatrists in the world. And she says she cannot tell parents, here's the yellow ribbon, and if they break it, it's for sure this. Now, if a child talks about harming themselves, wishing that they just wouldn't wake up in the morning, everybody else would be happier if I was dead, I'm going to cut myself, or I did cut myself, I'm going to hurt myself, or I did hurt myself, then it doesn't matter what's really going on. We treat that like an emergency. Their words have power. Even if you think they're just saying it for your attention, doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. They pulled the fire alarm. We all leave the building, right? Every time until we get some help to understand why that behavior is happening and some language to talk about when it's real and when it isn't. But in the meantime, every time they pull the fire alarm, just in case, we leave the building.
Yeah.
So don't worry about overreacting if they're talking about or acting on self-harm. Show them that they can trust you to care every time that they do that.
Right.
Short of that, when they're just behaving in ways, and I don't mean just like it's simple, but when they are behaving in ways that you don't like, have changed their friends, changed their patterns, changed their sleep or their eating habits in any way that seems to last more than a day, and you're thinking, I don't think this is okay. I think there's something not okay here. And you've been curious for a couple of times, and I wouldn't let it go months. I'd say you've been curious a couple of times. You've been like, hey, I noticed that you're sleeping a lot more than usual. Can you tell me about what you're feeling? Or can you tell me what's underneath that for you? Help me understand that better. I noticed that you're eating a lot more, or you're eating a lot less. I noticed that the people you usually hang out with every Thursday night haven't been around for a couple of weeks, and it seems like it's affecting your mood. Can you tell me how you're feeling? And they keep shutting you down, right? Because if they say to you, yep, I'm feeling these things, great. Okay. Do you need help with that? Is there anything to be worried about there? What support would be useful to you? All those things are useful to say to teenagers. But if they keep shutting you down, if they're like, I'm fine, it's nothing, leave me alone, why are you asking me that? Then if that's happened a couple of times and you're still concerned, I want to say to parents, you're an expert in your kid. Doesn't mean you're always right. Experts are not always right, but you're an expert in your kid. And if your gut is telling you you should be worried, and your child is telling you you should not be worried, you don't have to believe that. First step could be doing what we talked about, going to another adult that you trust who cares about your kid and asking them to spend a little time with that child and say, help me understand, like, I'd like a second opinion, please. But if that doesn't work, another thing you can do is go back to your child and say, I hear you telling me that you're okay. I feel like your behavior is communicating something different. And because one of my biggest jobs is to help keep you healthy and safe, I can't let this go. I understand that you would like me to let it go. I hear that I'm frustrating you or angering you, and I get that, and that matters to me. It just matters slightly less than your safety.
Yeah, that's
like,
good.
Harming our relationship is the second worst thing I could do, but ignoring you being in danger is the worst thing I could do.
Right. Now, what you said, I'm sure there's a lot of quote unquote, I'll say quote unquote, because I don't know if it's normal or not, but I hear that it's normal. There's some normal teen behaviors like moodiness. You can stop me if I'm wrong. Overconfidence, lack of self-esteem, rebellion, lack of motivation. So I guess because parents know their kids, for any of those, if it's on the extreme, like for example, overconfident, like should parents be concerned about that as a teen? They're overconfident. Like, is that
Oh
even
yeah, because it gets them in a world of hurt, right?
yeah,
The receptors in their brain are changing all the time. Now, you won't have much luck taking your child down a peg if overconfidence is what you're seeing. So I wouldn't talk about attitude. I wouldn't talk about how the feelings. Listen, I have a thing I say to my kids, my family all the time. When they're expressing whatever they're expressing, from arrogance to anger to sadness to frustration, doesn't matter. I say, your feelings are yours. Your behaviors are ours. So don't try and talk them out of their feelings. Their feelings are valid. They're theirs. You don't have to argue with anybody. Don't tell them how they should feel. Don't tell them how they shouldn't feel. Their feelings are theirs. But if their feelings are leading to behaviors that are against your rules or putting them in danger, that's where you're supposed to guide them. And it's not a but, it's an and. Your feelings are yours, and we don't hit in our family. Your feelings are yours, and you may not get on a motorcycle. So those are just two random examples of ways that you can say your feelings are valid and we have rules.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, are there any things that you think parents may not be aware of that could be potentially an issue, but maybe they're chalking it off as, oh, that's just normal behavior, but maybe it's really not normal behavior and it's something that they really need to look into?
I want parents to really recognize that how kids behave towards their friends, how teens behave towards their friends, is both developmentally normal, to be really tied to your peers no matter what they do, really loyal, really enmeshed, and also potentially dangerous. So don't think, oh, well, that's just peer pressure, or that's just how much they want to be like their friends or with their friends. Ask in general, like, what's a friendship deal breaker? And don't use a specific person, just what in general could somebody do, who, even somebody you considered a friend, where you would then say, yeah, I'm not going to be friends with somebody who does that or says that or treats me that way. And a really good way to talk to teens about these things is to say, what would concern you if, and you can name one of their best friends, if they were letting somebody else treat them badly? Is there anything, and you don't have to tell me specifics, but is there anything going on in your friend dynamics that's worrying you right now? I have a policy with my kids that they can tell me anything about their friends and nobody gets in trouble unless someone's life is in danger. And if someone's life is in danger, that's above their pay grade. I'm going to take that right off their plate. They shouldn't have to deal with that. And for the most part, I find teens don't want to deal with that. They don't want that pressure and that weight of responsibility. And I'm sure it's made them maybe not tell me something or other over time, but I needed them to be able to trust me. And trust is not, I'll never tell anybody anything you tell me. Trust is, here are my boundaries. I'll never tell anybody anything you tell me about your friends unless I think one of their lives is in danger. And then I absolutely would.
Yeah. And as we wind down the conversation, how would you address this to a parent whose child, they rarely want to tell their parent anything? They want to keep everything private because they think they're exposing their friends, even if it means their friend may be in danger, but the child just doesn't want to talk.
And some kids are like this about everything. They're really private, or like have a certain caution or modesty, or they think they're not supposed to tell their parents. One of the things we know is that teens who have 5 adults in their lives to whom they feel accountable and bonded, and I'll define those in a second, but teens who have 5 adults in their lives to whom they feel accountable and bonded are 5 times less likely to engage in risky behaviors, self-harm behaviors, but also substance abuse and early sexual exploration and jumping off cliffs. I mean, like, you name it, right? So that means having 5 adults in their lives to whom they feel accountable. That means they know they can get in trouble with that person. Not grounded necessarily, but like they'll hear from that person if they behave really badly. And bonded, they care if that person's upset with them. It may not stop them from the behavior, but they do care if that person's upset. Like, I'll give you an example. My nephew got in trouble for a bad behavior, and he was not at all surprised when he came over to my house the next weekend that I also talked to him about it. Like, hey, that wasn't okay. That really worried me. I don't want you behaving like that, even though he doesn't get grounded by me. And you could tell from his body language, he didn't like that I was upset with him. So that's accountable and bonded. Mm-hmm. 5 adults means even if you're talking about a teen who happens to have an accountable and bonded relationship with both their parents, which a lot of teens do not, they still need 3 more adults. So a lot of what parents can do is help their kids develop those relationships with trustworthy adults, teacher, coach, counselor, therapist, any of those folks who are not, a therapist is a great example. They're not going to come and run and tell parents. They've got privacy things to deal with. That's fine. But if you're not talking to me, I need to know you're talking to somebody trustworthy.
That's excellent. Yes.
Somebody's on the team of keeping you safe.
That's good. That's really good. Now, why don't you tell us about your book, From Stress to Resilience?
This is a book that's really about how do we navigate change. It's written for adults and for teens, but for us ourselves, not for how we parent other people. It is From Stress to Resilient, how to handle more and feel it less. And it is about how stress is not avoidable, but it is manageable. And we can feel less overwhelmed and winded if we approach it with the idea of figuring out which stress is useful and which stress we can walk away from.
Okay. And teens could read this as well and benefit from it?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, awesome. Totally. Thank you so much, Dr. G, for being here again. Now, where can people
find you? I'm so glad to. The easiest way is to find me online at askdrg.com.
Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you're enjoying the show, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple. I want to get this podcast in front of a wider audience, so any encouraging words you can leave will be so helpful. If not, just continue enjoying the show. Until next time.